The room was electric with anticipation. The spotlight gleamed down on the stage, casting long shadows over the faces of the crowd, who were waiting for what promised to be the most explosive political showdown of the year. The stakes had never been higher. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of a nation. Kamala Harris stepped onto the stage, her demeanor cool, her eyes scanning the room with the quiet confidence of someone who had already seen the depths of political warfare and emerged unscathed. She moved gracefully, yet there was a sharpness to her presence, like a blade hidden beneath silk. She knew what was at stake. She knew the people were watching, and she wasn't going to back down. Across from her, Ron DeSantis strode onto the stage with a different energy. His shoulders squared, his jaw set in defiance. His presence was the opposite of Harris's calm, a fire, raw and untamed. DeSantis was ready for war, and he wasn't interested in playing by any rules. The crowd's eyes flicked between the two, sensing the gravitational pull of the collision about to take place. As the moderator introduced them, DeSantis flashed a confident smile, a gesture that felt more like a challenge than a greeting. Kamala, ever composed, gave a slight nod but said nothing. The tension between them was palpable, a silent storm brewing just beneath the surface. Then it happened. The question was asked, simple, direct, and for a moment, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. DeSantis launched into his response, his voice rising, full of conviction, laden with the arrogance of someone who believed the truth bent to his will. Kamala didn't flinch. She let him speak, watching him carefully. And when he finished, when the last word hung in the air like a challenge thrown into the wind, she turned to him, her eyes never leaving his. And then, without warning, her voice sliced through the tension like a knife. "You don't get to rewrite history on my watch." The room fell into an eerie silence. It wasn't just the power of the words, it was the precision, the certainty behind them. The crowd was stunned, paralyzed in that single, electrifying moment. Harris had drawn the first blood, and DeSantis, for the first time that night, looked like he wasn't sure how to respond. The battle had begun. The atmosphere inside the debate hall was thick with anticipation, but it wasn't just the bright lights and the packed auditorium that gave it that charged feeling. This was a battle for more than just votes. This was about the very essence of America's future. It was about defining what the country would stand for in the years to come, who would lead it, and what values would guide it. Kamala Harris had risen to prominence as a beacon of justice, freedom, and unyielding integrity. A woman of color, a daughter of immigrants, and now, the first woman of South Asian descent on the national stage, her candidacy was symbolic of everything America could be at its best. She had fought for the people at every turn, championing policies that promised a fairer, more inclusive society. Her leadership was built on principles of equality, unity, and respect for the diverse fabric of the nation. Ron DeSantis, on the other hand, had carved out a name for himself as the hard-edged, uncompromising alternative. A governor who touted his conservative stances as the answer to what he saw as America's moral decay. He represented an America where power was for the few, where tradition was the law, and where dissent was silenced. His brand of politics was combative and exclusionary, a stark contrast to Harris's vision of unity. DeSantis had positioned himself as the man who would push back against the tides of progress, challenge the very ideas Harris stood for, and drag the country back to what he believed was its rightful place. The debate was more than just a contest of policies, it was the final stage of a contest over what America's identity would be moving forward. The stakes could not have been higher. A nation that had already experienced unprecedented divisions would either fall further into tribalism or rally together under a common purpose. The outcome of this debate could shape the next generation's view of justice, freedom, and leadership. For Harris, this was about the continuation of a vision she had fought for her entire career, fighting for communities whose voices had been silenced, fighting for the marginalized, and ensuring that the ideals of the American dream were accessible to all. But she wasn't just fighting for these causes, she was fighting to preserve the very soul of the nation. She understood the weight of the moment. This was her chance to show the country, through a televised showdown watched by millions, that her vision was the one America needed. For DeSantis, this was his moment to take control of the narrative. A debate win wouldn't just be a personal victory, it would be a clear message to the conservative base that he was the one who could stem the tide of progressivism and return America to its glory days. His ideological opponents had painted him as a threat to the values they held dear, but he wasn't concerned with their attacks. His supporters believed in him, and this was his chance to prove he was more than just words. It was time for action, time for him to prove that he could lead the country with strength, by any means necessary. The weight of their rhetoric was felt by every person watching from their homes, in every corner of the country. From the bustling streets of New York City to the quiet suburbs of the Midwest, this was the debate that everyone had been waiting for. And for good reason. What happened next could change the course of this election, and the future of America itself. The air was charged with the promise of a fight, one that would transcend politics and enter the realm of identity. Every word, every gesture would be dissected, analyzed, and remembered. The country was divided, already pulling in opposite directions, and this was the point of no return. And then, just as the tension seemed to peak, it came. Harris's sharp retort had struck the first blow. It wasn't just her words, it was the quiet, deliberate confidence with which she had delivered them. In that one moment, the stage had shifted. DeSantis may have come prepared with his rehearsed lines, but Harris had just shown the nation what true leadership looked like. Her response wasn't just about politics, it was about standing firm for the values that would shape the next generation. And as the tension in the room mounted, it became clear, this was no ordinary debate. What followed would reverberate through the country, and the world, for years to come. Ron DeSantis wasn't born into the halls of power. His rise to prominence was driven by ambition, pure and unrelenting. He wasn't a politician shaped by a desire to serve the people, he was a man who saw opportunity and seized it, pushing forward with calculated precision. He was a product of the very system that many claimed to be broken, and yet, he had managed to weaponize it for his own gain. DeSantis's story began like many others, small-town roots, a desire to succeed, and the innate belief that his path was destined to lead to greatness. A former Navy officer, his service was framed as a badge of honor, a testament to his commitment to the country. But beneath the surface, there was always something more. His military career, while decorated, had served as nothing more than a stepping stone, a chance to build the kind of image that could open doors to the corridors of power. In Florida, he positioned himself as the governor who would fight for the real America, the one that conservatives revered, where tradition was the foundation of the nation and where the government's role was to protect the privileged few. DeSantis capitalized on this, tapping into the frustrations of voters who felt alienated by a changing America. The pandemic presented him with the perfect storm, while others were hunkering down, following public health guidelines, and looking to mitigate the crisis, DeSantis took a different route. He became the anti-mask, anti-lockdown crusader, a figure who seemed to thrive on controversy. His rejection of public health measures wasn't about science or logic, it was about defiance. It was about positioning himself as the defender of personal liberty, even at the expense of public safety. But as his popularity grew, so did the contradictions. DeSantis's policies were often at odds with reality, built more on narrative than on fact. He rejected the very essence of a public health strategy, opting instead for rhetoric that galvanized his base while leaving the most vulnerable to fend for themselves. His stance on COVID-19 wasn't just about freedom, it was about control, about maintaining the narrative that those in power, like him, were the true protectors of the American way. Flashbacks painted a different picture of the man behind the mask. Behind closed doors, his arrogance was palpable. He ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent, and stifling opposition at every turn. He was quick to vilify anyone who dared to challenge him, labeling them as radicals or socialists, as if their very existence was a threat to the values he claimed to protect. His own record of corruption, politicians bought and sold like pawns, wealthy donors whispering in his ear, had begun to take its toll on the public's perception. The more DeSantis distanced himself from reality, the clearer it became, he wasn't fighting for the people, he was fighting for his own version of power, one built on fear and division. His record on racial justice was another glaring contradiction. While he touted himself as a protector of freedom, his policies were often seen as attempts to erase the hard-earned progress of marginalized communities. His war on education, particularly his attacks on critical race theory, was a direct assault on the very history that shaped America. By refusing to teach the uncomfortable truths of the nation's past, DeSantis sought to whitewash history, rewriting the narrative in his image. He wasn't just denying the reality of systemic oppression, he was actively working to perpetuate it. The more DeSantis spoke, the clearer it became that his agenda was driven by one thing: power. He cloaked his controversial decisions in the language of patriotism, but it was a nationalism that excluded, divided, and dehumanized. He played to the fears of those who felt left behind by a changing world, offering them a false sense of security in exchange for their loyalty. He promised to take back America from those who had hijacked it with their liberal agendas, and in doing so, he cemented himself as the champion of a fractured, angry America. But for all his bravado, the cracks were beginning to show. As his policies became more extreme, so did the backlash. The public began to see through the smoke and mirrors of his leadership, recognizing that the freedoms he promised were only for the select few, those who looked like him, voted like him, and thought like him. The rest of America was left in the dust, struggling to survive while DeSantis played the role of the savior in a world of his own creation. For Kamala Harris, DeSantis was everything she stood against. His politics were rooted in fear, division, and a denial of truth. The policies he championed were a direct threat to the progress she had fought so hard to achieve. In him, she saw the embodiment of everything that had undermined the nation's progress: corruption, dishonesty, and a refusal to acknowledge the pain of those who had been oppressed for generations. As DeSantis prepared for the debate, he was poised to double down on his ideology. He had built an empire on divisive rhetoric, and now, in front of millions, he had to defend it. This wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the future of America. And Kamala Harris, with her calm and measured response, had just thrown the first gauntlet. She was ready to face him head-on, to expose the man behind the rhetoric, and to remind the world that justice, freedom, and truth would always prevail. Kamala Harris's rise to prominence was not one of convenience. It wasn't marked by early promises of power or a smooth path to the top. It was a journey marked by struggle, sacrifice, and a steadfast commitment to justice. A daughter of immigrants, her mother from India and her father from Jamaica, Harris grew up in a world where the American dream was both a beacon of hope and a difficult, sometimes elusive reality. She was shaped by the lessons her parents instilled in her, that her heritage was her strength, not something to be hidden, that her voice mattered, even when society told her it didn't, and that the only way to create change was to work tirelessly, even when the world seemed stacked against you. From a young age, Kamala understood that the world saw her through a different lens, a lens that was colored by her race, gender, and the complexities of her immigrant background. As a child, she often found herself navigating a world that wasn't built for people like her. In school, she was one of the few black children in a predominantly white community. She faced racism, both subtle and overt, and yet, each encounter only made her more resolute. She learned early on that the world would try to define her, but she would define herself. Her journey into politics began with a deep sense of duty, a belief that public service was the most powerful tool to bring about change. She began her legal career with a clear sense of justice, fighting on behalf of those who had been left behind by the system. As a prosecutor, Harris fought tirelessly for victims of violence and injustice, often facing down opponents who were more powerful, better funded, and more connected. But she didn't flinch. She worked with a fierce determination, driven by a belief that everyone deserved a voice, especially those who had been silenced by inequality. Her record as San Francisco's district attorney and later as California's attorney general was built on this commitment to fairness, to truth, and to justice. However, the road was never easy. Kamala faced constant scrutiny, not just as a politician, but as a woman of color in a male-dominated arena. The barriers she faced weren't just professional, they were personal. Her decisions were constantly questioned, often through the lens of doubt and derision, as if her qualifications weren't enough. There were critics who saw her not as a capable leader, but as a token, a symbol of diversity who had somehow made it, despite the odds. But Harris never let those voices define her. Instead, she worked even harder, always focused on the bigger picture, the lives that depended on her ability to lead, to change the system, and to break down the walls that had been built to keep people like her out. As she rose through the political ranks, Harris never lost sight of the values that guided her. She knew what it was like to be told that you weren't enough, that you didn't belong, and that your voice didn't matter. But she also knew the power of resilience, the strength that came from turning adversity into action. She became known for her calm but fierce demeanor, an unwavering commitment to truth and justice that could not be shaken. Whether in the courtroom or on the campaign trail, Kamala's integrity was her shield. She spoke truth to power, unapologetically, even when it wasn't convenient. She wasn't just a politician, she was a force for accountability, a voice for the voiceless, and a symbol of what was possible when someone dared to dream beyond the confines of their circumstances. Her time in the Senate was a natural extension of this ethos. As California's senator, she became a leader on issues of social justice, healthcare reform, and racial equity. Her work centered on uplifting marginalized communities, fighting for those who had been overlooked or left behind by the systems in place. She championed policies that prioritized the needs of everyday Americans, affordable healthcare, criminal justice reform, and economic opportunities for those who had been denied access to the American dream. But it wasn't just about the policies she pushed, it was about the values she stood for. She wasn't just fighting for change, she was fighting for people, for their dignity, for their rights, and for the future they deserved. It was during her presidential run that Kamala truly emerged as a leader who could unite a fractured nation. Her campaign wasn't just a political effort, it was a movement. She spoke to the heart of America's struggles, racism, inequality, injustice, and offered a vision of hope. Her candidacy wasn't just about being the first woman of color to run for president, it was about embodying the very spirit of what America could be if it embraced its diversity, its truth, and its ability to overcome its darkest chapters. Now, standing on the stage in front of Ron DeSantis, Kamala Harris wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been told they weren't enough. She was fighting for every immigrant who had come to this country hoping for a better life, only to be met with hostility and discrimination. She was fighting for every black man and woman who had been told their worth was defined by their skin color, for every child who had been told their dreams were too big for the world to accommodate. This wasn't just a debate. This was the culmination of everything she had ever fought for, the opportunity to stand tall and make her case for a country that could still live up to its ideals, despite the forces that sought to tear it apart. Kamala Harris's story was one of perseverance. It was a story of someone who had been told no 1,000 times, only to rise and say, yes, I can. She had faced down adversity at every turn, and now, standing across from DeSantis, she was ready to face the biggest fight of her career. She knew that her experiences, her struggles, and her dedication to justice made her uniquely qualified to take on this moment. And as the debate began to unfold, one thing was clear: Kamala Harris was the hero America needed. The debate hall had transformed into a battleground. The crowd, now on edge, watched as the exchange between Kamala Harris and Ron DeSantis escalated. The tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just about policy anymore, it was about the soul of the country. The stakes had shifted, and what began as a war of words was quickly becoming a clash of ideologies. DeSantis, visibly agitated, leaned into the microphone, his voice rising as he sought to dominate the stage. "The truth is," he began, his tone dripping with condescension, "we've let liberal elites run this country into the ground. People like you, people who want to change everything, are what's destroying the American way." His eyes flashed with a mixture of arrogance and frustration. "You've sold out our country to a bunch of radical ideas that only benefit a select few." Kamala's expression remained calm, almost serene. She sat up straighter, her eyes unwavering as DeSantis took his shot. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her response. It wasn't just the content of his words, it was the venom in his delivery. He was trying to bait her into an emotional outburst, hoping she would lose her composure and confirm the narrative that she was just another political elite out of touch with the real America. But Kamala Harris wasn't just another politician. She had been tested in the fire of countless battles. This was nothing new. With a measured calmness, she looked directly at him and began to speak. "Governor," she said, her voice steady and clear, "your version of America isn't the America I know. It's one built on fear and division. It's one that tells people they don't belong, based on where they come from, how they look, or what they believe. That's not the America I fight for." There was a sharpness in her words now, but no anger. It was the kind of clarity that only comes when someone knows they are speaking the truth. DeSantis scoffed, his face tightening with disdain. "Oh, please," he shot back. "You talk about division, but you're the one encouraging it. Your policies are a disaster. You let criminals off the hook, you want to open the borders, and you're selling out our children's futures with your reckless ideas. You're all about inclusivity, but at what cost?" He jabbed his finger in her direction, trying to push her into a corner. But Harris didn't flinch. She looked at him with quiet resolve, as though his words had no power over her. "Let's talk about cost, Governor," she began, her voice growing even more resolute. "Let's talk about the cost of a broken healthcare system, one that leaves millions of Americans behind. Let's talk about the cost of an education system that's more concerned with banning books than teaching our children the truth. You want to talk about division? Your policies don't unite, they isolate. They divide people, they tear families apart, and they send the message that only some of us are worthy of success." The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. It wasn't just a counterargument, it was a stark revelation. Kamala wasn't just defending herself, she was speaking to the heart of what had made her a champion of justice and equality. She was articulating the very essence of her vision for America, a vision where everyone mattered, where justice wasn't negotiable, and where the country's future didn't hinge on fear-mongering or division. DeSantis's face darkened. He had been expecting a firestorm in return, but instead, he had encountered a wall of calm confidence, the kind of leadership that didn't need to raise its voice to be heard. He could feel the tide shifting. His usual tactics of stoking outrage, of tapping into the anger of his base, weren't working. His rhetoric was starting to fall flat, and the harder he pushed, the more it seemed like he was only digging himself deeper. Undeterred, DeSantis pressed on, attempting to shift the narrative. "You want to talk about values? Your values are what have led us to a place where cities are burning, where crime is out of control, where law and order are disregarded. And you're standing here, lecturing us about unity, when your policies are exactly what's tearing this country apart." The audience could feel the heat rising again. DeSantis's words were sharp and calculated, meant to inflame emotions, to rally his supporters with the promise of order and retribution. But Harris wasn't playing his game. She simply shook her head, as if to dismiss the falsehoods he was peddling. "Governor," she said, her voice cool but firm, "it's not about law and order, it's about justice. Real justice. The kind that ensures every American, no matter their background, has the same opportunities to thrive. The kind that doesn't turn a blind eye to systemic inequalities and pretend that everything is fine as long as the rich and powerful stay in charge." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. It was a quiet challenge, an invitation for DeSantis to look beyond his narrow view of the world, to see the people he was supposed to serve, not as pawns in a political game, but as human beings deserving of dignity and respect. DeSantis's face was flushed now, his arrogance no longer masking the cracks in his confidence. His words came faster, more desperate. "You're naive, Harris. You don't get it. People are tired of your bleeding heart liberalism. They want results. They want action." Kamala didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked on him. "Governor, action without empathy is nothing but empty power. You can legislate fear all you want, but it's not a solution. It's a failure. The tension in the room was unbearable now. The ideological divide between them had never been clearer. DeSantis's fiery rhetoric, fueled by fear and anger, clashed against Harris's calm, grounded approach, rooted in empathy, justice, and unity. The conflict wasn't just between two candidates anymore, it was between two visions of America. As DeSantis attempted another jab, his voice breaking through the rising tide of discontent, Kamala Harris stood firm, unwavering. The battle was far from over, but in this moment, it was clear who had the moral high ground. The question was no longer about winning the debate, it was about whether the nation would rise to meet the challenge of its own future. The audience was on the edge of their seats. The world was watching. And what came next would determine not just who won this debate, but who would win the future of America. The debate hall, once filled with the feverish buzz of partisan supporters and skeptical onlookers, fell into a stunned silence as DeSantis fired his most personal attack yet. His voice, dripping with disdain, cut through the air with surgical precision. "You want to talk about justice, Kamala," he said, his words heavy with venom. "You want to lecture us about equality when your policies have done nothing but protect criminals, put more law-abiding citizens at risk, and create a broken system that rewards failure? You're the embodiment of the liberal agenda that's running this country into the ground. You are a product of a system that panders to everyone except hardworking Americans. You have no idea what it's like to be a real leader, to take responsibility for the country's future, because you've spent your whole career playing politics with people's lives." The room was tense, the audience collectively holding its breath. For the first time in the debate, DeSantis's words struck at something deeply personal, Kamala Harris's career, her very character. It was an attack meant to provoke, designed to bait her into responding with emotion, to lose her composure. He saw this as his chance to finish her, to break the calm demeanor she had so carefully maintained throughout the night. But Kamala didn't react immediately. She sat perfectly still, her fingers lightly resting on the podium as though the attack had not even fazed her. For a brief, agonizing moment, the entire hall waited, waiting for her to lash out, to become defensive. But she remained poised. Her expression didn't flicker. She knew what was at stake, and more importantly, she knew how to respond. Harris took a deep breath. The room was still, as if time itself had frozen in anticipation of her reply. She looked at DeSantis, her eyes not with anger, but with quiet determination, her voice a soft contrast to the venom he had just unleashed. "Governor, I've spent my entire career fighting for the people who have been forgotten by systems just like yours," she began, her voice cool but firm, each word calculated with precision. "You want to talk about leadership? Let's talk about what real leadership looks like. Leadership is not about turning your back on people when they need you most. It's not about building walls and barriers to protect a privileged few while others suffer. It's not about using fear and division to distract from the fact that your policies have failed." A subtle murmur rippled through the audience. DeSantis was beginning to look uncomfortable, but he quickly masked it with a scoff, as if dismissing her words. But Harris wasn't finished. She had only just begun. "You talk about criminals," she continued, her voice rising in volume but maintaining its even tone. "You're the one who's criminalizing compassion. You've enacted laws that rip children from their parents' arms, that put people in cages for the crime of seeking a better life. You want to talk about justice? You're the one standing in the way of it. You sit here pretending to defend law and order, but your version of order is a system that punishes the poor and the powerless while rewarding the wealthy and the well-connected. You claim to be the protector of American values, but your values don't protect anyone who doesn't look like you." The crowd gasped, the force of her words hitting them like a wave. It wasn't just a response, it was a reckoning. Harris had not only challenged his words, but she had completely turned the tables, revealing the hypocrisy in his stance. DeSantis's confident smirk began to fade, replaced by a look of unease. He tried to interrupt, but Harris raised a hand, signaling him to wait. The power of her composure hung in the air, and in that brief moment, it was clear who controlled the debate. "Let's be clear, Governor," she said, her voice now cutting through the room like a blade. "You are not a leader of the people. You are a leader of a select few, the ones who benefit from inequality, from keeping people down while they climb higher. You don't care about law and order. You care about keeping the system rigged in your favor, in the favor of those who have always had power. But you know what, Governor? The people are waking up. They see your lies, they see your manipulation, and they know it's time for change." Her eyes locked onto him now, unblinking. "You can try to rewrite history, you can try to distract with fear and division, but we know the truth. The truth is that you've failed, and you will fail again. Because your vision isn't what this country needs. Your vision is built on a foundation of fear, but the American people, we are built on hope." A stunned silence descended on the room. DeSantis stood motionless for a moment, his face a mask of frustration and disbelief. He hadn't expected this. He had expected anger, defensiveness, a crack in her calm armor. Instead, he had been met with a devastatingly clear, calculated response, an argument rooted in truth and moral clarity. Harris paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. She wasn't done. The weight of her next statement would be the final blow. "Governor, you want to talk about criminals," she said, her voice low and steady. "The real criminals are the ones who steal opportunities from the American people. The ones who hoard power, who suppress votes, who build policies that benefit themselves and no one else. That's the crime I'm fighting against. And I won't stop until we've built a country where everyone, every single person, no matter their background, has a fair shot at success." The tension in the room was unbearable now. The audience had been holding its breath, but now they were fully on her side, their support undeniable. And then, DeSantis did something unexpected. His arrogance faltered. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The crowd, sensing the moment of weakness, began to murmur, some shaking their heads, others exchanging glances. For the first time in the debate, Ron DeSantis looked small. The roar of applause that followed was deafening. Harris stood still, her posture unwavering, as the crowd erupted in approval. She had won this round, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of her logic and the sharp precision of her words. DeSantis's arrogance had crumbled under the weight of her truth. It was clear now. The moment had shifted. The nation had witnessed the power of calm, decisive leadership, and in the eyes of millions, Kamala Harris had emerged as the victor in this battle for the soul of America. The debate had ended, but the echoes of Kamala Harris's mic drop moment reverberated far beyond the debate hall. As the final applause died down, the world was already turning its attention to the aftermath, the reverberations of the showdown that would define the political discourse for weeks to come. The moment Harris had dismantled DeSantis's arguments with unrelenting clarity had not just shifted the momentum of the debate. It had ignited a firestorm on social media, with the internet exploding in real time as people from all walks of life weighed in. Within minutes, viral hashtags began to flood Twitter, hashtag Kamala for the win, hashtag DeSantis defeated, and hashtag Leadership Matters dominated the trending list, as millions of Americans, and those beyond, shared their reactions. The memes came next, funny, poignant, and sometimes biting. One image circulated of DeSantis frozen mid-sentence, his arrogant smirk fading into an expression of confusion, overlaid with the text, "When the truth hits harder than your talking points." Another meme, showing Harris's calm and steady response, was captioned, "When you bring a knife to a gunfight, but your opponent brings a scalpel." On Instagram, stories exploded with clips of Harris's devastating counterattack, replayed and reshared by both everyday users and influential public figures. The video of her dismantling DeSantis's hypocrisy became a symbol of a political reckoning, one that had touched a nerve in America's broader conversation about leadership, integrity, and accountability. But the debate's fallout wasn't just about memes or viral moments. It quickly became a defining conversation across all media. News outlets scrambled to analyze every nuance of the debate. Political commentators on CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News broke down the exchange with intensity, dissecting Harris's responses and DeSantis's faltering defense. A common refrain emerged in the aftermath: Harris had delivered a masterclass in political leadership. Pundits praised her for showing what true leadership looked like: calm in the face of provocation, powerful in her conviction, and unflinching in her commitment to justice. But it wasn't just the left-leaning outlets that were enamored with Harris's performance. Even conservative pundits, who typically held DeSantis in high regard, were forced to admit that he had been bested on that stage. DeSantis had no answer, one commentator noted, and that's the problem. It wasn't just that he couldn't defend his policies, it's that he couldn't defend his vision for the future. Kamala's response wasn't just powerful, it was the future of the country speaking back to the past. On the other side, however, DeSantis's supporters rallied, trying to spin the narrative in his favor. Conservative media outlets quickly focused on Harris's liberal agenda and framed her responses as idealistic but impractical. They tried to downplay the significance of the debate, positioning DeSantis's strong stance on law and order and American values as a rallying cry for the right-wing base. But even within his camp, cracks began to show. Behind closed doors, some of his biggest donors were questioning whether his combative rhetoric had the appeal necessary to win over the broader electorate. DeSantis's campaign quickly issued statements attacking Harris's radical left-wing views, but it was clear the damage had been done. The reaction was not confined to just the media. Social media platforms exploded with discussions that would change the direction of the political conversation. Activists, journalists, and political insiders took to Twitter and Facebook, highlighting Harris's refusal to engage in the gutter politics of DeSantis's camp. "She didn't just argue for policies, she argued for values," said one post, which was reshared thousands of times. The message was clear: this was a new kind of leadership, one that didn't rely on fear or division, but on strength, integrity, and a vision of the future that truly included everyone. Meanwhile, DeSantis's supporters on social media continued to push back, but it wasn't the kind of reaction they had hoped for. Even within conservative circles, there was an uncomfortable undercurrent of disillusionment. The debate had forced many to question their allegiance to DeSantis's brand of politics. One Twitter user wrote, "I voted for DeSantis because I thought he could fight for us. But tonight, I saw him lose to a politician who isn't afraid to tell the truth. That's what leadership looks like." The comment went viral, sparking an even larger conversation about the need for leadership that was both pragmatic and principled, not just combative. The hashtag Leadership Matters trended for days. Celebrities and influencers weighed in, with many showing their support for Harris. Lin-Manuel Miranda, known for his outspoken progressive views, tweeted, "Leadership is about standing in the fire. Kamala did that tonight. The country needed that. Hashtag Kamala for the win." The tweet garnered thousands of likes and shares, reflecting how the debate had shifted from a political contest to a broader conversation about the qualities that define a true leader. On the other hand, the attacks on DeSantis came fast and furious. One meme depicted him as a man drowning in his own words, unable to answer Harris's arguments. Another juxtaposed his frantic deflections with a calm image of Harris standing tall, saying nothing. A prominent Twitter user from Florida summed it up: "If you're looking for a leader, look at Kamala Harris. If you're looking for a loudmouth who doesn't know how to defend his record, look no further than DeSantis." By the following morning, news outlets had labeled the debate a pivotal moment in the race. For Harris, this wasn't just a victory in the debate hall, it was a victory for the future of American democracy. It was clear that her words had struck a chord, not just with her supporters, but with the broader electorate. Her message of unity, justice, and equality had resonated, and it was shaping the national conversation in a way that few had predicted. In the days following the debate, the political landscape began to shift. The once solidified divide between the two candidates seemed to have grown even more pronounced, but the tension also revealed something deeper: the electorate was no longer willing to settle for political theater. The hunger for real, substantive leadership that transcended party lines and spoke to the heart of the nation's struggles, was undeniable. Kamala Harris's words had not only turned the tide of the debate, they had ignited a nationwide conversation that would set the stage for the rest of the campaign. The shockwaves of her victory in the debate were being felt across every corner of the country, on the streets, in schools, at dinner tables, and across social media. This was more than just a political contest. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment that would define the course of the nation's future. And as the world watched, one thing became crystal clear: Kamala Harris was not just a candidate. She was a force to be reckoned with. The days following the debate felt like an emotional release for the country. Kamala Harris's poise in the face of provocation, her unwavering commitment to truth, and the moral clarity she had delivered with each of her responses had turned the page on a pivotal chapter in the campaign. The intensity of the debate lingered in the air, but now the narrative had shifted. It was no longer about winning or losing in the traditional sense, it was about what America truly needed from its leaders. In the aftermath, Harris took a moment to reflect on the overwhelming response from the public. She understood the impact of her words. This wasn't just another political debate where rhetoric and bravado clashed, it was a moment of reckoning. And what the American people had witnessed was far greater than a simple political exchange. They had seen the values that had shaped her entire life come to the forefront. The true measure of leadership was no longer about who could shout the loudest or who could stoke the most anger, it was about who could speak with integrity, humility, and a deep sense of duty to the people. The country was hungry for that kind of leadership. Harris knew it because she had felt it every day since she began her journey in politics. From her early days as a prosecutor, standing up against powerful forces to fight for justice, to her time as California's Attorney General, where she challenged the systemic inequities of the criminal justice system, she had always believed that leadership was about service, not self-interest. It was about listening to the needs of the people, not creating divisions to win votes. She knew the stakes had never been higher. But what she had learned, over and over again, was that a leader's true strength came from their ability to inspire others, to act with empathy, and to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. That was the heart of what America needed. Not a leader who would use fear to drive people apart, but one who would bring them together, one who believed in the power of unity, justice, and equality. Harris's reflection wasn't just a personal victory, it was a universal message. She understood that the country had reached a breaking point. Americans were exhausted from the endless cycle of division, the constant battles that seemed to define the political landscape. People wanted something different. They wanted a leader who didn't just promise change, but who lived those values every day. They wanted a leader who wasn't afraid to confront difficult truths, who would show up for the people, not for themselves. Her victory in the debate was a moment of triumph, not just for her, but for everyone who had fought for dignity, truth, and justice. It was a testament to the power of calm leadership in the face of adversity. Her ability to respond to DeSantis's attacks with such grace, to turn his provocations into opportunities for moral clarity, was a reflection of everything she had stood for throughout her career. The truth is, Harris said in a televised address just days after the debate, her voice calm but filled with conviction, leadership isn't about arrogance. It isn't about who can shout the loudest, who can tear others down the most effectively. Leadership is about serving the people with respect. It's about doing the hard work of listening, of making sure that no one, no matter their race, their background, or their income, feels left behind. Leadership is about truth, and it's about understanding that the only way we can move forward as a country is together. She paused, allowing her words to settle into the hearts of the viewers. The camera captured her resolve, strong, unwavering, but filled with the quiet strength that had defined her entire career. You see, she continued, what we witnessed in that debate wasn't just a political fight. It was a clash of values. And those values are the foundation of everything I stand for. My vision for this country has always been one where every person has the opportunity to succeed, where we don't let fear or hate drive our decisions, and where we don't shy away from the hard conversations that are needed to create change. This country needs leaders who understand that we can't go backward, we have to go forward, together. Her words, simple yet profound, resonated deeply with the millions who had tuned in. It wasn't just a political speech, it was a call to action, a reminder of the values that had shaped the very foundation of the United States: equality, justice, and the undeniable power of unity. Kamala Harris had shown, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that leadership wasn't about winning for the sake of winning. It was about making decisions that were grounded in what was right for the people, even when it wasn't easy. The true measure of leadership, as she had proven, was not in the heat of the moment, but in the quiet, steady commitment to the values that would stand the test of time. As the crowd continued to cheer, and as the social media posts flooded in, Harris smiled softly. This wasn't the end of the road, it was just the beginning. The journey ahead would be filled with challenges, with moments of doubt, and with opposition. But she was ready. Because leadership was never about the applause or the spotlight, it was about showing up every day for the people, and for the truth. And in that moment, the future of America was clearer than ever. The country didn't need a leader who thrived on division. It needed a leader who would bring people together, who would elevate the ideals of dignity, service, and truth above all else. And Kamala Harris knew, with unwavering certainty, that she was ready to lead that charge. The battle wasn't over. But the moral victory was hers. What we witnessed in that debate was nothing short of epic. Kamala Harris stood strong, unwavering in her commitment to truth and justice, while Ron DeSantis was exposed for the hollow rhetoric he had been peddling. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the outcome? A game-changing moment that will be talked about for years to come. This showdown wasn't just a battle of words, it was a battle for the very soul of America. A battle between those who seek to divide and conquer, and those who believe in the power of unity, justice, and dignity for all. Kamala Harris showed the world what true leadership looks like. She didn't raise her voice in anger, she spoke with clarity, with purpose, and with an unwavering commitment to the people. She didn't just win the debate, she reshaped the conversation and set a new standard for what leadership should be. Now, the question is, what will you do with this moment? Will you stand with the values of truth, dignity, and the power of leadership? If you believe in these values, in the fight for a better, more just America, it's time to take action. Join us in this movement. This is just the beginning. Together, we can build a future that reflects the ideals of equality, justice, and opportunity for all. The time for change is now, and it's up to us to make that change happen. So, subscribe, share, and be part of the change that we need. The future of America is in our hands. Let's make sure it's one where truth, integrity, and compassion lead the way.